Have you ever been in one of those situations where you've wanted something as a kid, but then you didn't acquire that thing until much later in life? And then once you acquire said thing, the level of satisfaction is almost undescribable. Yeah, well, that's what happened to me. Probably the reason why I'm making this video. I usually don't make videos like this. This is Hornby's new London, Brighton and South Coast Railway E2 class tank engine, except Hornby calls it something else. They call it the SE and CR 060 tank engine. I am not making this up. This is literally a picture from their website with the product. More on that later though. Right now though, I feel like it's an appropriate time to talk about the history of the E2s. Because even though people already know the history of the E2 class tank engines, I feel like this video wouldn't be complete without a little history lesson on the engine that this engine is supposed to be. Hopefully that made sense. I think it made sense. Alright, here we go. The E2 class tank engines were built for the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway from 1913 to 1960, and they were designed by Lawson Billington, which is the reason why these tank engines were sometimes called Billington E2s. 10 examples of these tank engines were built and they were given the running numbers 100 to 109. These running numbers were altered twice by both Southern Railways and British Railways. These engines were designed for heavy shunting, pulling short-distance freight trains, and pulling suburban trains. What's interesting to note is that a lot of 060 tank engines on British railways were small, short, and stumpy. However, the E2s were anything but short and or stumpy. The E2s were known to be very big, and they were probably, as far as I'm aware, the biggest 060 tank engines in British railway history. And of course, we can't talk about the E2 class tank engines without mentioning the fact that these tank engines later became the basis of a certain tank engine that we all know and love. Unfortunately, as unique and interesting as these tank engines were, to put it in the words of Nick Train 123, these tank engines were like DeLoreans. Meaning that these tank engines had a very unique design and they were real eye-catchers, but they had a lot of flaws and they were very poorly designed. If you haven't noticed already, the second batch of E2s were built with extended side tanks, while the first batch of E2s were not. This is because the first batch of E2s proved to be very thirsty boys and their side tanks could not hold enough water. So that's why from 1915 to 1916, 5 more E2s were built by Brighton, but this time these ones were built with extended side tanks. I'd like to believe that this did make some improvements, because technically, the second batch of E2s were able to hold more water. It was also claimed by workers who worked with the E2s that if they went anywhere near 50 miles an hour, they would become very rough riders and throw the crew around like peas in a frying pan. Like this. These engines also had a poor braking system because they were equipped with the old-fashioned air brakes, which most likely played as an inspiration for the story Thomas and the Trucks. Sometime in 1923, all 10 of the E2s were eventually equipped with the newer and more modern vacuum brakes, but they kept their old air brakes just so they were compatible with the older rolling stock. Sometime in the 1950s, the E2s were sent to Southampton docks, but even that proved to be a strain on the poor engines. With the E2s having 16-foot-long wheelbases and the tight curves at Southampton docks, it would be nearly impossible for the E2s to go around these tight curves without derailing. So the E2s were unfortunately limited to where they could go around the docks complex. Now here's where things get interesting. Over the years, a lot of people came up with these great ideas and complex designs on how they would rebuild the E2s if they were given the chance to do so. Just to name a few examples, some people believe that if you shorten down the E2s to have a 10-foot-long wheelbase, kind of like the S100s, they would be better performers. Look at the little baby. Other people believe that if you gave the E2s bigger coal bunkers, kind of like what you see on a J50, they would have a larger fuel capacity. And that's just to name a few ideas that people have had over the years. The funniest part about it all is the fact that the answer was right under our noses, and we were all too dumb to realize that it was even there. And the answer came in the form of a YouTube video made by Nick Train 123. This man is a genius, and after watching this video several times, I feel like even I could rebuild the E2s. And I know nothing about building steam engines. So for anyone who hasn't seen this video already and is interested in watching it, the link is in the description. Back to the history lesson, even though these engines were riddled with flaws, they actually managed to stay in service until the end of British mainline steam. Because of the fact that Britain was right in the middle of World War II, British Railways needed every locomotive that they could get their hands on, which is the reason why the E2s were deemed good enough for the work they were given. Sadly, as of today, all 10 of the E2s have been scrapped and none have survived into preservation, with the last member of the E2 class being scrapped in 1963. So overall, yes, the E2s were extremely flawed, but you have to admit, whether if you think they were useful or useless, they were capable of doing the job that they were given, and they did it quickly and efficiently. Despite the fact that a lot of people hate these engines, I find them very fascinating. I guess it's just one of those examples, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Before we talk about the actual product, let's talk about the box. It's a box. Nothing else needs to be said. It's just a box. I mean, it's a nice box. I like the box. But at the end of the day, it's just your standard Hornby box. I mean, that's one thing that I really don't understand when somebody does a review on something. Why do you always have to review the box? I mean, we're not here to see you talk about a piece of cardboard. We want to see what's inside the piece of cardboard. Anyway, that's enough of that. This is Hornby's newest E2 class tank engine model, made in 2022. Of course, as I said already, this is not called a Hornby E2. It's called an SE and CR 060 tank engine. And I'm not gonna lie, it's literally just a retooling of their old Hornby Thomas model. And if you don't believe me, I have a Hornby Thomas for comparison. And if you look at these two side by side, you can tell that there's barely any differences. Well, except for the fact that this one has a different livery and a golden dome. And no face. This is also a beginner's model, which is being sold for $67. Now, for some of you, you're probably thinking, oh my god, that's a lot of money. But here's the thing, there are two kinds of Hornby E2s, the old Triang model and the newer 2022 one. Now, I highly recommend both models because they're both great models. But the older Triang model goes for a lot of money, up to the point where you're going to have to sell a limb or a liver on the dark web, and that's not something I'm planning on doing. Now, truth be told, this is the original model that I wanted, but because of the fact that over time it became more expensive, I thought this was the better option since it's cheaper. So take my advice if you're planning on buying a Hornby E2. If you have the money to buy the older Triang model, go for it. But in my personal opinion, if you gotta buy one of them, get the newer version. It's a lot cheaper and your wallet will thank you later. You can also customize it if you ever feel like it. Now, the livery on this model is extremely unrealistic. Not once has an E2 ever worn an SE and CR green livery. It also has the running number 326, which is a running number that none of the E2s have ever worn. But you know what? I find the model very charming because of this, because it has its own original livery. Now, the model does look nice, but how well does it run? Okay, now this model, I have not run this model once yet until now. So, obviously, I'm gonna make sure everything's good with the rails and everything's connected. So yeah, I'm just gonna run it forwards a little bit. Okay, here we go. Stopped. Another thing that I should probably mention, I have not cleaned my track in how long, because I do not have anything to clean my track. It's definitely something that I need to definitely invest in. So here we go, maybe a little faster this time. It won't move. So, overall, do I recommend this model? Absolutely. It's such an amazing model. It's so charming to look at, and it works like a dream. You know, when you actually have good track on your layout, but nonetheless, it still works. I do have plans to paint it, but I'm not gonna... Okay. This van is a pain in my butt. I hate it. I hate it. There. You stay there now for the rest of your life. I hate you. So... that happened. Anyway, as I was saying, I do have plans to paint the model. Maybe in like a black livery. I'm indecisive if I want to paint it in BR black or LBSC black, because both are very nice liveries. But I'm not going to do that for a while though, because I like the model the way it is for now. But as I said already, I highly recommend this model. It's affordable, it's charming, etc, etc. I don't care if the livery is unrealistic, it's a very nice model, and again, it runs very well. So if you're just starting to get into the whole hobby of model railroading, especially with Hornby, I definitely recommend that this should be one of the first locomotives that you buy. If you are interested in buying this engine, I will leave a link in the description. As always, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe because there's always new stuff on the way. I hope you all enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making this, and I'll see you all next time. And remember kids, your parents lied to you, money does buy happiness.